Hello and welcome back to my F1 retrospective series. In the last video, we looked at how Juan Manuel Fangio won his first title with Alfa Romeo after fending off the late season title challenge from Alberto Ascari in this Ferrari. Surely this would only be the beginning of a spectacular rivalry, right? Well, not yet at least. Since F1 at this time was in a bit of a weird place. The amount of races, 7, excluding Indy, and the point system had remained the same, but there was a lot of change elsewhere. As I mentioned at the end of the last video in the series, Alfa Romeo had run out of money and thus wouldn't be competing in 1952. This left their drivers, like Farina and Fangio, without a drive. And while Farina managed to land a drive over Ferrari, Fangio did not. He was instead slated to drive for the BRM team, however that never came to fruition, leaving the reigning champion without a drive. But what it also did was leave Ferrari as the only serious F1 competitor on the grid, which wouldn't be very fun. So to combat this, the FIA ran the championship under Formula 2 regulations with 2-litre naturally aspirated engines, as this would allow a much larger grid size and hopefully more competition. Note that I said hopefully. But with that preseason information out of the way, let's get on with the season proper. The season opener was to take place at the Bremgarten circuit in Switzerland. The Works Ferrari team had entered 3 cars for the race, driven by Farina, Piero Taruffi and Andre Simon. Regular drivers Ascari and Vioresi were absent. Ascari was over in America readying himself for the Indy 500, while Vioresi was recovering from a road accident. Maserati had planned to enter a team consisting of Argentine greats Gonzalez and Fangio, but they withdrew before the weekend even began. In qualifying, Farina put his Ferrari on pole ahead of Taruffi, while the third Ferrari of Simon lay in fourth. Robert Manson split the Ferraris in third, while local driver Rudi Fischer, driving a privately entered Ferrari, lined up fifth. On race day, Farina took off into the lead until lap 16 when his car broke down. This left Taruffi in the lead, with a battle for second place emerged between the Gordini of Jean Berra and the third Ferrari of Simon. This battle was then curtailed when Berra was forced to make a pit stop. Farina then took over Simon's car. He was back in the race until on lap 51 his car broke down again. Some things never change. All this handed second place to Fischer, who would take his first podium and was the only driver not to be lapped by Taruffi, as he took the win unchallenged. Jean Berra completed the podium. British drivers Ken Wharton and Alan Brown finished 4th and 5th to take the first points finishes for Fraser Nash and Cooper, respectively. Once again, we won't be talking about the Indy 500 as it was completely irrelevant. The only thing of note that happened was that Alberto Ascari made the trip over to give it a go. He didn't finish. Moving on. On to Spa next, and while Ascari was back, another notable driver, and team, was not. Juan Manuel Fangio, following the collapse of his BRM drive, had landed a seat with Maserati. However, their new car wasn't ready yet, and then Fangio had his own problems. A week or so earlier, he was due to compete in a non-championship race at Monza. However, he missed his connecting flight, and rather than miss the race, he elected to drive to the event, which took many hours. On the day of the race, an exhausted, sleep-deprived Fangio crashed heavily. He was taken to hospital where it was revealed that he'd broken his neck in the accident, and thus he spent the rest of 1952 recovering. Back at the Belgian forest, Ascari, Farina, and Taruffi respectively made it a Ferrari 1-2-3. They were followed by Robert Manzon and John Berra. Mike Hawthorn lined up for his Grand Prix debut in 6th place. On race day, surprise surprise for Spa, it rained. Taruffi got a horrible start and dropped all the way down to 9th. Berra, meanwhile, got an amazing start, overhauling all 3 of the leading Ferraris to take the lead. It didn't last. By lap 2, Ascari and Farina had passed him, and once they had, they never looked back. Taruffi then went past too, however the lap after he did, he spun at Malmedy and then Berra was collected, and both were out of the race. Hawthorn was now in the fairy tale position of a debut race podium. However, it wasn't to be. His car was ailing, and Manson then passed him. However, Hawthorn did manage to hold on to 4th place. Ascari won the race from Farina and Taruffi, making a podium lockout for the Scuderia. Local driver Paul Frere finished in 5th place. In the championship standings, Taruffi and Ascari stood level at 1 win apiece. Meanwhile, Farina got on the board and Rudi Fischer fell on to 5th. For 1952, the French Grand Prix had been moved from Reims to Rouen, and good news! Maserati had arrived. Sort of. The works team still wasn't here, but Philippe Tonsolin was driving a privately entered car. Anyway, in qualifying, the Ferraris of Ascari, Farina and Taruffi lined up 1, 2, 3 in that order, while the 2 Gordinis of Berra and Manson lined up 4th and 5th. Tonsolin's private Maserati entry was all the way down in 16th. The race itself was kind of boring, there's no sugarcoating that. Ascari led Farina off the line, and it stayed that way for the whole race. Beira and Manson initially jumped Taruffi on the first lap, but by lap 4 he had overtaken them both. He had passed Manson and then Beira had crashed. He remained in third for the rest of the race. So for 73 laps, pretty much nothing happened except for the odd engine blowing up. This meant that Ascari won his second race in a row, having started from pole, set the fastest lap, and having led every single lap, thus completing a Grand Slam. Farina was second, Taruffi third, Manson fourth, and Maurice Trintignant in fifth. Beira eventually recovered from his crash to finish seventh. Following this result, Ascari took a 5-point lead at the top of the table ahead of Taruffi and a 6-point lead over Farina in third. John Beira would not be taking part in the British Grand Prix at Silverstone, as the week before in a non-championship race he had broken his shoulder blade in an accident. Maurice Trintignant took over his work Gordini drive in the interim. The three Ferraris once again took the top three positions in qualifying, although this time it was Farina who bested Ascari. However, this didn't even last until turn 1, as Ascari jumped Farina off the line, and for the next 85 laps he didn't look back. Farina was second, however on lap 26 he was forced into a pit stop as his sparks plug needed to be changed, and he dropped down the order. Taruffi would inherit second place, having been on somewhat of a recovery drive after ending the first lap down in ninth due to a poor start. Due to other mechanical maladies for those in front of him, Mike Hawthorne had managed to finish in third place and take his maiden F1 podium in only his third outing. Farina eventually recovered to finish sixth, just outside the points. Ascari was truly stamping his authority. He now led Taruffi by 8 points, while Farina's non-score meant that he was way behind. At this point, a second title looked unlikely. When the paddock arrived at the Nürburgring, Maserati were finally here, for real this time. Ferrari, surprise surprise, were the fastest in qualifying, with Ascari and Farina lining up first and second. The Gordinis of Trintignant and Manson put in a good performance to line up third and fourth, while Taruffi would start down in fifth. Felice Bonotto was the highest placed Maserati in 10th. The race, for the most part, was a total procession. The only really interesting thing happened towards the end. Ascari was leading Farina, Taruffi, and Rudi Fischer when, 2 laps from home, Ascari needed to dive into the pits for oil. He emerged 10 seconds behind Farina. He made up the difference in just 1 lap, and eventually would catch and pass his teammate just over a mile from the flag to take the win, his 4th on the bounce, as well as his 2nd Grand Slam of the season. Taruffi was running 3rd, however, rapidly disintegrating suspension allowed Fischer to pass him, while Taruffi limped home in 4th. Beira, meanwhile, marked his return from injury with a 5th-place finish. Ascari now had 36 points, 14 ahead of Taruffi in 2nd, while Fischer's 2nd podium of the season elevated him to 4th. Now, I need to mention that stupid only some of the results count rule. For this season, only the best 4 results of the 7 races would count towards a driver's points total. Ascari had now won 4 races, and he had set the fastest lap in every single one of them, meaning he had scored 36 points. 36 points was the absolute maximum a driver could score in a season. This meant that Ascari was champion, and there was simply nothing anyone could do to stop him. The date, by the way, was the 3rd of August, the earliest anyone had ever clinched a title, and it would remain that way for 1965. He has essentially just completed a 100% completion speedrun of winning an F1 title. It's why I feel that no discussion of racing greats is truly complete without Ascari. He did what only one other man would ever do in F1. F1 made its debut in the Netherlands at Zandvoort. Despite the championship battle already being over, there were still 2 more rounds to go. The drivers would just be racing for pride and bragging rights more than anything at this point. Luigi Vioresi, who had been absent from the championship since the end of 1951 due to a road accident, made his return to the Ferrari lineup, replacing Taruffi. In qualifying, Ascari once again took pole, while Mike Hawthorne put in a phenomenal performance to line up 3rd, splitting the Ferraris of Farina and Vioresi. On race day, Hawthorne put up a valiant fight, but his car was by far the inferior of the Ferraris. By lap 5, they had assumed their regular formation, and it stayed that way. Ascari led Farina and Vioresi home, while Hawthorne finished 4th and Manson finished 5th. This was Ascari's 5th win on the bounce, and his 7th in total, meaning that he overtook Fangio for having the most wins in F1. This was also yet another Grand Slam, his 3rd of the season, and his 2nd on the trot. Yeah, back-to-back Grand Slams. The championship may have already been over, but Ascari was apparently still firing on all cylinders. Farina had now overhauled Taruffi due to the latter's absence, while Hawthorne's excellent results meant that he was now 5th, an incredible achievement given the machinery he had at his disposal. Despite the fact that the championship had already been won and Ferrari had spent all season stomping all over their rivals, they fielded 5 cars for the race at Monza. Why? It was Monza. Home. Nothing beats winning at home. The Works Maserati team made its first serious entry with a full team of 3 cars. These were driven by Bonetto, Franco Roll, and Jose Froilan Gonzalez. In qualifying, Ferrari once again monopolised the top positions. It was Ascari on pole, followed by Fioresi and Farina. Trantignon put his Gordini on 4th, while Gonzalez was the highest placed Maserati in 5th, absolutely trouncing his teammates who were all the way down in 13th and 16th. On race day, Gonzalez got off the line like a stabbed rat, rocketing up from 5th to 1st, and unlike other surprise leaders who fell behind again almost immediately, the Argentine was actually still in the lead just before the halfway point. People probably hoped that somebody else was actually going to win for once. However, it all came undone, as a slow pit stop for Gonzalez allowed Ascari back through, as well as Fioresi. Gonzalez would eventually repass Fioresi, however he couldn't overhaul Ascari, who took the checkered flag first to score his 6th consecutive Grand Prix victory. Farina wasn't far behind Fioresi in 4th place, while the Works Maserati of Bonetto took the final points-paying position, while Taruffi failed to score. A curious quirk happened as both Gonzalez and Ascari had set the exact same fastest lap, so as a result the point was divided equally between the 2 men, with each being awarded half a point. This meant that Farina would now finish runner-up to the dominant Ascari, with Taruffi in 3rd. Fisher and Hawthorne would remain in 4th and 5th, respectively. This season was kind of boring, wasn't it? But at least there were some hopes going into 1953 that Ascari might have his life made a little bit more difficult for him. Maserati would compete fully in 1953, and what's more, Fangio was back. And as we've already seen, anything was possible when that man got behind the wheel. Until next time.